Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the program Double Standards. Today we are discussing that is this the time we said goodbye to the United Nations? And to discuss this issue in details, analytically, we have our regular analyst and our guest in the studios. Alan, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, is this the time?
Well, look, before I get going on this, you usually say to me that there's an anniversary. Do you know what today is the anniversary of?
Yeah, this is the anniversary, the June 1945, the United Nations Charter was.
No. It's the 48th anniversary of the Israeli attack on the American spy ship, the Liberty. Just have a good look at that, viewers. That's my jacket.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And they killed, in attacking that ship, they killed 34 Americans, wounded 100. And what it proved, as I say in my book, is there is nothing Zionism won't do to its friends as well as its enemies in order to get its own way. But today is the 48th anniversary of that. Now to your question, the UN. Can we start off by putting on the table a very basic truth about the UN,
yeah,
which
go ahead, please.
I suspect very few, if any, of your viewers know.
By all means.
The UN was corrupted by Zionism at a very, very early stage in its life. A series of events that prompted President Truman to say, if this pressure continues, the UN will be put out of business. That was President Truman in a memorandum. Well, the pressure did continue, not only from Zionism, but it did continue. And one might say the UN was in many important respects put out of business. Now, the starting point is Palestine again. Palestine was the first test of the UN's power, authority, and integrity. You remember, the British decided to leave, and they handed over what the hell to do about Palestine to the United Nations. Then we come to the General Assembly resolution to partition Palestine. Now, because it was the General Assembly, there had to be a 2/3 majority. And the voting had to be postponed twice because there weren't the votes there for the majority. What then happened is that the Zionist lobby, plus 26 American senators, plus a man called David Niles, who was Zionism's top man in the White House, they bullied and bribed and blackmailed some governments to change their no votes to yes or to abstain. And the three countries who were actually blackmailed were Liberia, the Philippines, and Haiti. And one or two other people were bribed as well. So that's how it started. And although the partition resolution was planned, the UN incidentally had no right, no authority, no power to partition Palestine and give away 56% of its land to a group of alien incoming Jewish immigrants. But President Truman was still unhappy because he understood, because of the Arab opposition, the partition plan would have to be imposed by force. And he wasn't prepared to use force. So it went back to the General Assembly. The partition resolution, Ijaz, was actually vitiated, really vitiated. And what to do about Palestine went back to the General Assembly to vote, to consider what to do. It was while they were considering what to do that Israel unilaterally declared itself to be in existence. So to sum up, right from almost its beginning, the UN was corrupted by Zionism.
So when we say corrupted, so that means that it's very close to be closed down like the League of Nations. I mean, League of Nations, Americans are very clever. They did not join the League of Nations at all. So they carried on with 58 members towards the end. And throughout the 26 years' time, the first testing time for the League of Nations, as per its covenant, was the prevention of war in Abyssinia and the rise of fascism, later on the rise of Nazism, and about 24 aggressions that took place in the 1930s. So League of Nations obviously had to be closed down. Now, we have seen, I mean, I was just sifting through some information since yesterday, that as many as 160 big conflicts in the last 69 years the United Nations has completely failed even to address them.
Well, there have been about 70 or 80 genocides.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the moment that the UN completely lost its integrity can also be identified. And again, we are back to Palestine and Resolution 242 of 1967, after that war. Now, all the major powers knew that it wasn't a war of Israeli self-defense. It was a war of Israeli aggression. Now, what Resolution 242 ought to have said, it ought to have demanded Israel's unconditional withdrawal from the land taken in the war, and it ought to have said, if you stay in occupation for a while, we will not allow you to so much as build one illegal settlement, or you'll be sanctioned. But what actually happened? The first text of Resolution 242 talked about Israel must withdraw from the occupied territories, the meaning all. Under Zionist pressure, President Johnson buckled, and the word "the" was taken out of the text, so Israel was only required to withdraw from occupied territories. The significance of that, Ijaz, is that it gave Zionism the power to decide how much territory it would withdraw from. Now, I talked to a lot of the top diplomats soon after that and asked them what the hell was going on. And they basically said, look, it's very simple. If we'd have done what was right, Israel would have ignored it. Israel would have told us to go to hell. And is there anybody in this organization who's going to confront Israel? And the answer is no, so we thought, what the hell?
Now, we would like to focus on the few flashpoints which are going on for the last maybe 100 years. And we would like to concentrate on this. First of all, I mean, would you like to say something on the United Nations failure on addressing the issue of the Kashmiris? If you would like to say something, the 1948-49 war between India and Pakistan on Kashmir, Kashmiris, they were hoodwinked by the instrument of accession.
Yeah, but it's, you can't make a particular example of that. The fact of the matter is, when you have the five great powers with a veto, that any one of them can veto the whole damn thing. And to me, one of the things that has to be fundamentally changed about the UN is you've got to remove the veto power. Decisions should be taken, in my view, by, say, 2/3 or even 80% vote in favour of something. But it doesn't matter. You've got to have the will to enforce UN decisions, Security Council decisions. And the will isn't there, Ijaz.
Yeah, that's true. Now, the funding, as it is funded as an international organization which is interested with maintaining global security, arms control and other areas with almost more than 12.5 organizations. United Nations always complains towards the middle of every year, just about 3-4 months before starting the General Assembly session every year in September, that such and such country hasn't paid its subs. So currently, as of last week, United Nations is short of $1.2 billion of the previous budget. So if an international organization which has to maintain the world peace and security, if that is not funded by that's okay. There are two types of funding, one is the compulsory funding, mandatory funding by every member. Of course, they take into account the economic condition of that country, the debts and other things. But more than 28 countries are well off. They can pay. And these 7 defaulters out of these 28, they are amongst the Western countries, the members of the NATO. Would you say this is another ploy, this is another way of bullying the United Nations?
Can I tell you a very fascinating, true story of how this pressure on threatening to withdraw money from the UN works? I'll be very brief. Way back in the early 70s, I set up my own production company to make the first ever film on global poverty. Spent 2 years of my life doing it with a great crew. And at a point, I showed the film to Kurt Waldheim. the Secretary General of the UN at the time, because I wanted him to host a world premiere of the film. We're talking about 1974. It was the 7th special session of the UN General Assembly, called to discuss the need for a new world economic order. Now, he saw it months before then, and he said, yes, Alan, I will host a world premiere for this film in the Dag Hammarskjöld Theatre the night before the session formally opens. Well, 2 weeks before the invitations were due to go out, I was in New York, and I got a call asking me to go and see the Secretary General in his office at 7 o'clock in the evening. So I arrived. He's on the 38th top floor. It's deserted except for one bodyguard. He shows me, and I'm sitting alone with Kurt Waldheim, the Secretary General. And he says, I've got a problem. Oh, I said, what's the problem? He says, I'm under great pressure to drop this idea of giving your film a world premiere. Oh, I said, who's the pressure coming from? And he said, Kissinger. And I said, what's the pressure? He said, the usual one, threatening to withdraw funds and not pay funds. So he looked at me and he said, what shall I do? And I said, Mr. Secretary General, if you give in to this pressure, you will be betraying everything your organization is supposed to stand for. With that, he thought, and he banged his fist on the table, and he said, we will do this. He got up and he walked me to the lift, and as the lift door opened, he again looked at me like that and he said, I promise you, we will do this. And he did it. But Kissinger had the last laugh in a sense. Every other member sent their full ambassador. Kissinger sent only the third secretary as a sort of insult.
That tells
so
everything.
He and I had a wonderful row in front of all the other ambassadors after the preview. But there's an example, pressure direct to the UN Secretary General not to do something.
As of today, United States still owes over $200 million to the UN. And this is one big country. And now, going through the leadership plays a pivotal role towards the life of any organization. Starting with Dag Hammarskjöld, Trygve Utham, Kurt Waldheim, Paris Dikoyar, Boutros Ghali, Kofi Annan, and the gentleman Ban Ki-moon. Can you pick up one gentleman who really worked earnestly, honestly, diligently for promotion of peace?
Dag Hammarskjöld.
A few examples?
Well, look what happened to him. There's a great mystery about how he was killed. Although people don't like to talk about it in the polite circles, there was an extra body, an unaccounted for body, on the plane that crashed. I think there were some major powers that didn't want him to solve the problem that he was involved in the Congo. I think U Thant was very stupid in 1967, before the 67 war. He dallied too long in New York. He should have got off his backside and gone to the Middle East immediately and personally sorted it out, because the Arabs weren't intending to attack Israel. It was solvable. But I think, who decides who's going to be Secretary General? The five major powers, and most of all America. And America is never going to accept a man who will be strong, tough, and try to implement the various things the UN Security Council is supposed to do. They don't want a strong leader. I was
just going through some research because I had to do another program on the plight of the Rohingyas, the Muslims in Burma. And I just got hold of a few documents, very well documented, that U Thant did not play any role towards emancipating those people who were, at that time, they were less than 100,000 in Rakhine and other areas. And he is considered as a criminal based on that sort of information which I got access to. So why they pick up the weakest people? Just to, I mean, we come back to that question after the break, and then I'll ask that question, why always the weakest person is picked up as the leader to lead the United Nations. So we take a short break. Once we come back from the break, we will, the telephone lines will be open. You can ask any question or pass any comments. And we would like to explore the answer to this question from Alan. So we take a short break.